What's up everyone, Ultra League Premier Classic is starting later today, so let's get ready for it by taking a look at some top teams. If you don't have many resources, this is the format for you, since it bans all the expensive Excel Pokemon, Mythicals and Legendaries, which includes Ultra Beasts by the way. What's left is, well, this, basically a meta where I would say there's an extremely clear top 3 of Trevenant, Nidoqueen and Swampert. These 3 will be the Pokemon to either run or beat, alright? Honestly, these 3 just together already form a pretty solid team without many core breakers. So you could run that, maybe out of 3 of them, or if you're not doing that, which is what I would suggest, your gameplay should, or your game plan should be, how do I counter this core? Now, there's already a couple Pokemon that can beat all 3, like Warren, for example, who was a very big player last time Ultra League Premier Classic was around. This time, it's a little weaker as it's been nerfed, but it's still extremely strong, of course. A Gyarados is like fine against all 3 as well, though does struggle a little bit versus Nidoqueen and Trevenant, actually. Crobat does okay versus all 3, kind of a Nidoqueen, Trevenant core breaker mostly, but it can put in a lot of work versus the Swampert as well. Then Lapras as well is a very solid option to beat all 3. And then there's a bunch of Pokemon that can beat like 2 out of 3 of that core. For example, Gengar somewhere here, I think. Gengar, for example, can beat Nidoqueen and Trevenant. Then we have like Dragonite and Como-O, which do very well versus Swampert and Trevenant, and quite fine versus Queen. So definitely a lot of solid core breakers around to make some fun teams. Speaking of teams, let's get into them, starting with my favorite team I ran last time Ultra League Premier Classic was around, Poliwrath, Kanto and Typhlosion. I managed to get an 18 win streak with this squad last time, and it's just a lot of fun to run. We have Poliwrath in the lead, which is a pretty good core breaker for the top 3. Well, it beats Nidoqueen, it is very okay versus Swampert, it generally wins that, though it can get a little dicey if they manage to hit an Earthquake. And then Trevenant, you do lose, but you do have Ice Punch as coverage, so if you can manage to get some energy on Poliwrath and hit a couple Ice Punches, they are in trouble. The recommended moveset, or the moveset that I recommend there, is Ice Punch, Dynamic Punch. I think that's the way to go. However, Scald as a second move instead of Dynamic Punch or Ice Punch could work as well for sure. Then in the middle you got Kanto, which is generally going to be your pivot in this line with Poison Jab, Thunder Punch and Dark Pulse. Has very nice coverage, especially versus Trevenant and Charmers, which is really what you need to cover Poliwrath from. And with its like flexible moveset, it can hit basically everything for at least neutral damage. So even if you lose a matchup, you usually make it quite close. The biggest issue would be a Swampert that comes in, but in that case, you clear the path for Typhlosion to sweep in the end game. That's why I got Typhlosion in the back. Well, 1, it also beats the Charmers and Trevenant, which is really what you need with Poliwrath. And 2, it's an amazing sweeper. Blast Burn hits everything. Super hard run, shields are down, except for the waters, but that's why you're running Solar Beam to one-shot those. Overall, very fun team that worked super well for me a couple seasons ago, and I think it's gonna work quite well again. Main issue, definitely something like Swampert, but you should be able to play around it as long as you can get your Poliwrath on it. And then Como-O could be kind of difficult too. However, it's not going to be common at all. And you got Ice Punch and Poliwrath to kind of deal with it as well. Warren got nerfed, but definitely not enough to make the Warren Trevenant core unplayable. Even with a slightly less good Warren, this duo is still incredible because there just aren't many good core breakers. The only real ones are like Obstagoon and Snorlax. And then there's like some slightly niche ones like Kanto and Typhlosion, but they just aren't that consistent at it. Even Snorlax and Obstagoon can struggle versus this core, to be honest, which is just why this duo is way too strong. Pair it with any Pokemon that do well versus Obstagoon and Snorlax, and you got a solid squad. The bottom team example there is the most obvious. Toxicroak or Nidoqueen in the lead, Warren Trevenant in the back. Just play it like an ABB. If you don't face an Obstagoon or Snorlax in the lead, switch into your Warren or your Trevenant, lure it out, take it out with your lead once they're gone, and then the other Warren or Trevenant just sweeps the game. You can also play it like a top team as an ABA. If you lead it to an Obstagoon or Snorlax in this case, that's fine. You just stay in with Warren, get him low, and just hope your backline does well against theirs. Next up, a real classic. A team that's been ran for many seasons to great success. First in the Open Ultra, then in the Premier Ultra, and now in the Ultra Premier. Classic, where it's just gotten a little better because of Superpower Dragonite and the nerf to Warrine, which both buff Dragonite just a tad. Dragonite, of course, still loses super hard versus Fairy types, especially Charmers and Ice types, which is why we're doing it with Escavalier, because Escavalier deals with both of those quite well, except for like Togekiss, but luckily I don't think it's going to be that common. Escavalier, of course, loses super hard to fire, but Dragonite covers that perfectly, so together they form a very good core. You pair this with a third, that's a pretty good pivot. So something that can beat like Ice and Fairy too, but also functions as a pivot. That could be Gengar, that could be Snorlax, that could be Lapras, that could be Warrine. These could all work quite fine. Overall, pretty solid team. Next up, we got a very solid duo in Swampert plus Crobat. These cover each other incredibly well, as Swampert loses hard to Grass, of course, which Crobat beats. Crobat loses to Electric, which Swampert beats. Both do struggle with Ice types, especially Crobat, but luckily, Swampert has a ton of play versus the main Ice types in Warrine and Lapras, so that should be incredibly playable. Dragonite could also be a little issue, but Crobat does fine there, and if you just run a third, that's fine against Dragonite as well. It should be very, very fine. As for third, you can really pick any good pivot. I have two examples on the top right there. One option is Warrine in the middle if you want that extra Dragonite coverage. Warrine is still just an amazing core breaker and pivot in this meta, so functions quite well in this team. Or another option will be Gallade. In that case, I would suggest you lead Crobat, as Gallade is quite weak to Trevenant, just like Swampert. This case, team is really like an ABB. You need to save your Crobat for a potential Trevenant. If you don't see a Trevenant, try to get in your Gallade at some point. You lure it out. Gallade actually has a surprisingly fine matchup there, as Confusions do a ton of damage, so they have to throw their energy to take you out. You let them do that, you farm them down with Crobat, and then hopefully, once the Trevenant is gone, Swampert can sweep. Overall, definitely a team I'm gonna try out, as I really love Crobat. I think it will work quite well. One Pokemon I really wanna try out is Sneasler. It's currently ranked 9 on the PvPoke rankings, which I do believe it's quite overrated. It's incredibly squishy and bait dependent, which just skews its rating upward. But even still, I think it's going to have a lot of play as very unique coverage with Shadow Claw, Close Combat, and X-Scissor, or even Aerial as a second move, which makes it a fighter that has a ton of play versus Trevenant, or can even beat Trevenant. So, super unique. I think in this meta, it's going to function as an interesting pivot. People might not expect it and switch in their Trevenant against it, at least in the first days, which would be very, very funny. It struggles hard versus Confusion users like Gallade and Charmers though, so you want to lead something that beats those, and Snorlax is a good option there. It of course doesn't hard beat the Charmers, but it's tanky enough to generally beat them. That's why I'm leading Snorlax. It's just a solid option. If you bad lead, you switch into your Sneasler, and then in the back, anything that goes well with Snorlax basically. Gallade does very fine there. Toxicroak does very good there. Nidoqueen works very cool there too. Another option you could consider is something like Trevenant. However, they become quite weak versus Obstagoon, so I'm not sure if I'd recommend that. Team definitely not the strongest. There's some core breakers, especially Dragonite and Nidoqueen, though all of these Pokemon have play versus both, so you can definitely pair around them, but they will be a bit tough. And then Oranguru? I honestly, you're not gonna see Oranguru. You shouldn't worry about it, but I put it here because I wanted to talk about it for a second. This Pokemon is really interesting. I don't recommend you build it, because it has to be a Hundo level 40, which is like stupid. But if you do build it, it beats Nidoqueen, it beats Trevenant, it has a shot versus Swampert, it beats Snorlax, it does very well versus Sneasler and Toxicroak. It even has kind of neutral matchup versus Dragonite. This thing has some play in the meta. This thing definitely has some play in the meta. However, I think it's gonna disappoint a bit. It like versus all of these Pokemon, even versus Nidoqueen, it's like a winning matchup, but only slightly. So I wouldn't recommend it, but you know what? I think it's a funny pick. I do think it's a funny pick. So I wanted to talk about it for a second. Anyway, that was it for today. Let me know down in the comments below if there's anything I missed and what team you'll be running in the Ultra League Premier Classic. Thanks everyone for watching. See you in the next one. Good luck, your battle trainers.